He might not get another chance. Quickly and silently, Harry dodged out of his hiding place and climbed the stairs. Looking back, he saw an enormous backside and a shiny bald head buried in a box. Harry reached the door at the top of the stairs, slipped through it, and found himself behind the counter of Honeydukes. He ducked, crept sideways, and then straightened up. Honeydukes was so crowded with Hogwarts students that no one looked twice at Harry. He edged among them, looking around, and suppressed a laugh as he imagined the look that would spread over Dudley's piggy face if he could see where Harry was now. There were shelves upon shelves of the most succulent-looking sweets imaginable. Creamy chunks of nougat, shimmering pink squares of coconut ice, fat, honey-colored toffees, hundreds of different kinds of chocolate in neat rows. There were large barrels of every flavored beans and another of fizzing whiz-bees, the levitating sherbet balls that Ron had mentioned. Along yet another wall were special effects sweets, Drooble's best blowing bubblegum, which filled the room with bluebell-colored bubbles that refused to pop for days. The strange, splintery, tooth-flossing string mints, tiny black pepper imps, breathe fire for your friends. Ice mice, hear your teeth chatter and squeak. Peppermint cream shaped like toads, hop realistically in the stomach. Fragile sugar-spun quills and exploding bonbons. Harry squeezed himself through the crowd of sixth years and saw a sign hanging in the furthest corner of the shop. Unusual tastes. Ron and Hermione were standing underneath it, examining a tray of blood-flavored lollipops. Harry sneaked up behind them. Ugh, no, Harry won't want one of those. They're for vampires, I expect, Hermione was saying. How about these, said Ron, shoving a jar of cockroach clusters under Hermione's nose. Definitely not, said Harry. Ron nearly dropped the jar. Harry, Hermione squealed. What are you doing here? How did you... Wow, said Ron, looking very impressed. You've learned to apparate. Of course I haven't, said Harry. He dropped his voice so that none of the 6 years could hear him and told them all about the Marauder's map. How come Fred and George never gave it to me, said Ron, outraged. I'm their brother. But Harry isn't going to keep it, said Hermione, as though the idea was ludicrous. He's going to hand it in to Professor McGonagall. Aren't you, Harry? No, I am not, said Harry. Are you mad, said Ron, Googling Hermione. Hand in something that good? If I hand it in, I'll have to say where I got it. Filch would know Fred and George nicked it. But what about Sirius Black, said Hermione. He could be using one of the passageways on that map to get inside the castle. The teachers have got to know. He can't be getting in through the passage, said Harry quickly. There are 7 secret tunnels on the map, right? Fred and George reckon that Filch already knows about 4 of them. The other 3, one of them's caved in so no one can get through. One of them's got the Whomping Willow planted over the entrance so you can't get out of it. And the one I just came through, well, it's really hard to see the entrance to it down the cellar, so unless you knew it was there... Harry hesitated. What if Black did know the passage was there? Ron, however, cleared his throat significantly and pointed to a notice pasted on the inside of the sweet shop door. By order of the Ministry of Magic, customers are reminded that until further notice, Dementors will be patrolling the streets of Hogsmeade every night after sundown. This measure has been put in place for the safety of Hogsmeade residents and will be lifted upon the recapture of Sirius Black. It is therefore advisable that you complete your shopping well before nightfall. Merry Christmas. See, Ron said quietly, I'd like to see Black try to break into Honeydukes with Dementors swarming all over the village. Anyway, Hermione, the Honeydukes owners would hear a break-in, wouldn't they? They live over the shop. Yes, but... Hermione seemed to be struggling to find another problem. Look, Harry still shouldn't be coming into Hogsmeade. He hasn't got a signed form, and if anyone finds out, he'll be in so much trouble. And it's not nightfall yet. What if Sirius Black turns up today? Now? He'd have a job spotting Harry in all of this, said Ron, nodding through the mullioned windows at the thick, swirling snow. Come on, Hermione, it's Christmas. Harry deserves a break. Hermione bit her lip, looking extremely worried. Are you going to report me? Harry asked, grinning. Oh, of course not, but honestly, Harry. Seeing the fizzing Whizbees, Harry? Said Ron, grabbing him and leading him over to their barrel. And the jelly slugs and the acid pops? Fred gave me one of those when I was 7. It burnt a hole right through my tongue. I remember Mum walloping him with her broomstick. Ron stared broodingly into the acid pop box. Reckon Fred'd take a bit of a cockroach cluster if I told him they were peanuts. When Ron and Hermione had paid for all of their sweets, the three of them left Honeydukes for the blizzard outside. Hogsmeade looked like a Christmas card. The little thatched cottages and the shops were all covered in a layer of crisp white snow. There were holly wreaths on the door and strings of enchanted candles hanging in the trees. Harry shivered. Unlike the other two, he didn't have his cloak. They headed up the street, heads bowed against the wind, Ron and Hermione shouting through their scarves. That's the post office. Zonko's is up there. We could go to the Shrieking Shack. Tell you what, said Ron, teeth chattering. Shall we go for a butterbeer and the 3 broomsticks? Harry was more than willing. The wind was fierce and his hands were freezing, so they crossed the road, and in a few minutes were entering the tiny inn. It was extremely crowded, noisy, warm, and smoky. A curvy sort of woman with a pretty face was serving a bunch of rowdy warlocks at the bar. That's Madame Rose Moretta, said Ron. I'll get the drink, shall I? He added, going slightly red. Harry and Hermione made their way to the back of the room, where there was a small vacant table between the window and a handsome Christmas tree, which stood next to the fireplace. Ron came back 5 minutes later, carrying 3 foaming tankards of hot butterbeer. Happy Christmas, he said, raising his tankard. Harry drank deeply. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted and seemed to heat up every bit of him from the inside. A sudden breeze ruffled his hair. The door of the 3 broomsticks had opened again. Harry looked over the rim of his tankard and choked. Professor McGonagall and Flitwick had just entered the pub in a flurry of snowflakes, shortly followed by Hagrid, who was deep in conversation with a portly man in a lime green bowler hat and a pinstriped cloak. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. In an instant, Ron and Hermione had both placed their hands on top of Harry's head and forced him off of his stool and under his table. Dripping with butterbeer and crouching out of sight, Harry clutched his empty tankard and watched the teachers and Fudge's feet move towards the bar, pause, then turn and walk right towards them. Somewhere above him, Hermione whispered, Mobilarmus. The Christmas tree beside their table rose a few inches off the ground, drifted sideways, and landed with a soft thump right in front of their table, hiding them from view. Peering through the dense lower branches, Harry saw 4 sets of chair legs move backwards from the table right beside theirs, then heard the grunts and sighs of the teachers and the minister as they sat down. Next, he saw another pair of feet, wearing sparkly turquoise heels, and heard a woman's voice. A small gillywater. Mine, said Professor McGonagall's voice. 4 pints of mulled mead. Marauder, said Hagrid. A cherry syrup and soda with ice and an umbrella. Said Professor Flitwick, smacking his lips. So you'll be the red currant rum minister? Thank you, Rose Moretta, my dear, said Fudge's voice. Lovely to see you again, I must say. Have one yourself, won't you? Come join us. Well, thank you very much, Minister. Harry watched the glittering heels march away and back again. His heart was pounding uncomfortably in his throat. Why hadn't it occurred to him that this was the last weekend of term for the teachers, too? And how long were they going to sit there? He needed time to sneak back into Honeyduke's if he wanted to return to the school tonight. Hermione's leg gave a nervous twitch next to him. "So what brings you to this neck of the woods, Minister?" said Madame Rosmeretta's voice. Harry saw the lower part of Fudge's thick body twist in his chair as though he were checking for eavesdroppers. Then he said in a quiet voice, "What else, my dear, but Sirius Black? I dare say you heard what happened up at the school on Halloween." "I did hear a rumor," admitted Madame Rosmeretta. "Did you tell the whole pub, Hagrid?" said Professor McGonagall exasperatedly. "Do you think Black's still in the area, Minister?" whispered Madame Rosmeretta. I'm sure of it," said Fudge shortly. "You know that the Dementors have searched my pub twice," said Madame Rosmeretta, a slight edge to her voice. "Scared my customers away. It's very bad for business, Minister." "Rosmeretta, my dear, I don't like them any more than you do," said Fudge uncomfortably. "Necessary precaution. Unfortunate, but there you are. I've just met with some of them. They're in a fury against Dumbledore. He won't let them inside the castle grounds." "I should think not," said Professor McGonagall sharply. "How are we supposed to teach with those horrors floating around?" "Hear, hear," squeaked tiny Professor Flitwick, whose feet were dangling a foot off the ground. "All the same," demurred Fudge, "they're here to protect you all from something much worse. We all know what Black is capable of." "Do you know, I still have trouble believing it," said Madame Rosmeretta thoughtfully. "Of all the people to go over to the dark side, Sirius Black was the last I would have thought. I mean, I remember him when he was just a boy at Hogwarts. If you told me then that he was what he was going to become, I'd have told you that you had too much mead." "You don't know the half of it, Rosmeretta," said Fudge gruffly. "The worst he did isn't widely known." "The worst?" said Madame Rosmeretta, her voice alive with curiosity. "Worse than murdering all of those poor people, you mean?" "I certainly do," said Fudge. "I can't believe that. What could possibly be worse?" "You say you remember him at Hogwarts, Rosmeretta," murmured Professor McGonagall. "Do you remember who his best friend was?" "Naturally," said Madame Rosmeretta with a small laugh. "Never saw one without the other, did you? The number of times I had them in here, ooh, they used to make me laugh. Quite the double act, Sirius Black and James Potter." Harry dropped his tankard with a loud clunk. Ron kicked him. "Precisely," said Professor McGonagall. "Black and Potter, ringleaders of their little gang. Both very bright, of course. Exceptionally bright, in fact. But I don't think we've ever had such a pair of troublemakers." "I don't know," chuckled Hagrid. "Fred and George Weasley could give 'em a run for their money." "You'd have thought Black and Potter were brothers," chimed in Flitwick. "Inseparable." "Of course they were," said Fudge. "Potter trusted Black beyond all of his other friends. Nothing changed when they left school. Black was the best man when James and Lily got married. They named him godfather to Harry. Harry has no idea, of course. You can imagine how the idea would torment him." "Because Black turned out to be in the league with you-know-who," whispered Madame Rosmeretta. "Worse even than that, my dear." Fudge dropped his voice and then proceeded in a low sort of mumble. "Not many people are aware that the Potters knew you-know-who was after them. Dumbledore, who was of course working tirelessly against you-know-who, had a number of useful spies. One of them tipped him off, and they alerted James and Lily at once. He advised them to go into hiding. Well, of course, you-know-who wasn't an easy person to hide from. Dumbledore told them that their best chance was a Fidelius charm." "How does that work?" said Madame Rosmeretta, breathless with interest. Professor Flitwick cleared his throat. "An immensely complex spell," he said squeakily, "involving the magic concealment of a secret inside of a single living soul. The information is hidden inside of the chosen person or the secret keeper, and henceforth impossible to find unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. As long as the secret keeper refused to speak, you-know-who could search the village where Lily and James were staying for years and never find them, not even if he had his nose pressed up against their sitting room window. So Black was the Potter's secret keeper, whispered Madame Rose-Moretta. Naturally, said Professor McGonagall. James Potter told Dumbledore that Black would rather die than tell where they were, that Black was planning to go into hiding himself. And yet, Dumbledore remained worried. I remember him offering to be the Potter's secret keeper himself. He suspected Black? Gasped Madame Rose-Moretta. He was sure that somebody close to the Potters had been keeping you-know-who informed of their movements, said Professor McGonagall darkly. Indeed, he had suspected for some time that someone on our side had turned traitor and was passing information back to you-know-who. But James Potter insisted on using Black. He did, said Fudge heavily. And then, barely a week after the Fidelius charm had been performed, Black betrayed them, breathed Madame Rose-Moretta. He did indeed. Black was tired of his double agent role. He was ready to declare his support openly for you-know-who, and he seemed to have planned this for some moment of the Potter's death. But as we all know, you-know-who met his downfall in little Harry Potter. Powers gone, horribly weakened, he fled, and this left Black in a very nasty position indeed. His master had fallen at the very moment when he, Black, had shown his true colors as a traitor. He had no choice but to run for it. Filthy, stinking turncoat, Hagrid said so loudly that half of the bar went quiet. Shh, said Professor McGonagall. I met him, growled Hagrid. Must have been the last to see him before he killed all those people. It was me that rescued Harry from Lily and James' house after they were killed. Just got him out of there. Just got him out of the ruins, poor little thing, with a great slash across his forehead and his parents dead. And Sirius Black turns up on that flying motorbike he used to ride. Never occurred to me that what he was doing there. I'd known he'd been Lily and James's secret keeper, though he'd just heard the news of you-know-who's attack and come to see what he could do. White and shaken he was, and you know what I did? I comforted the murdering traitor, Hagrid roared. Hagrid, please, said Professor McGonagall, keep your voice down. How was I to know he wasn't upset about Lily and James? It was you-know-who he cared about. And then he says, give Harry to me, Hagrid. I'm his godfather. I'll look after him. But I had me orders from Dumbledore, and I told Black no. Dumbledore said Harry was to go to his aunt and uncle's. Black argued, but in the end he gave in. Told me to take his motorbike to get Harry there. I won't need it any more, he says. I should have known there was something fishy going on then. He loved that motorbike. What was he giving it to me for? Why wouldn't he need it any more? Fact was, it was too easy to trace. Dumbledore knew he had been the Potter's secret keeper. Black knew he was going to have to run for it that night, knew it was a matter of hours before the Ministry was after him. But what if I'd given Harry to him, eh? I bet he'd have pitched him off the bike halfway out to sea, his best friend's son. But when a wizard goes over to the dark side, there's nothing and no one that matters any more to him. A long silence followed Hagrid's story. Then Madame Rose-Moretta said with some satisfaction, but he didn't manage to disappear, did he? The Ministry of Magic caught up with him the next day. Alas, if we only had, Fudge said bitterly. It was not we who found him. It was little Peter Pettigrew, another of the Potter's friends, maddened by grief, no doubt, and knowing that Black had been the Potter's secret keeper, he went after Black himself. Pettigrew? That fat little boy who was always tagging around with them at Hogwarts, said Madame Rose Moretta. Hero worshipped Black and Potter, said Professor McGonagall. Never quite in their league talent-wise. I was often rather sharp with him. You can imagine how I regret that now. She sounded as though she had a sudden head cold. There now, Minerva, said Fudge kindly. Pettigrew died a hero's death. Eye-witnesses, muggles of course, we wiped their memories later, but told us how Pettigrew cornered Black. They say he was sobbing. Lillian James, serious. How could you? And then he went for his wand. Well, of course, Black was quicker. Blew Pettigrew to smithereens. Professor McGonagall blew her nose and said thickly, Stupid boy, foolish boy. He was always hopeless at dueling. Should have left it to the ministry. I tell you, if I'd go back to Black before little Pettigrew did, I wouldn't have messed around with wands. I'd have ripped him limb from limbs, Hagrid growled. You don't know what you're talking about, Hagrid, said Fudge sharply. Nobody but a trained hit wizard from the magical law enforcement squad would have stood a chance against Black once he was cornered. I was junior minister in the Department of Magical Catastrophes at the time, and I was one of the first on the scene after Black murdered all of those people. I will never forget it. I still dream about it sometimes. A crater in the middle of the street so deep it had cracked the sewer below. Bodies everywhere, muggles screaming, and Black standing there laughing with what was left of Pettigrew in front of him. A heap of blood-stained robes and a few fragments. Fudge's voice stopped abruptly. There was a sound of 5 noses being blown. Well, there you have it, Rose Moretta, said Fudge thickly. Black was taken away by 20 members of Magical Law Enforcement Patrol, and Pettigrew received the Order of Merlin First Class, which I think was some comfort to his poor mother. Black's been in Azkaban ever since. Madame Rose Moretta let out a long sigh. Is it true he's mad, Minister? I wish I could say that he was, said Fudge slowly. I certainly believe his master's defeat unhinged him for a while. The murder of Pettigrew and all of those muggles was the action of a cornered and desperate man, cruel, pointless. Yet I met with Black on my last inspection of Azkaban. You know, most of the prisoners in there are sitting there muttering to themselves in the dark. But I was shocked at how normal Black seemed. He spoke quite rationally to me. It was unnerving. You'd have thought he was merely bored. Asked if I was finished with my paper. Cool as you please. He said he missed doing the crosswords. Yes, I was astounded at how little effect the Dementors seemed to be having on him, and he was one of the most heavily guarded in the place, you know? Dementors outside of his doors day and night. But what do you think he's broken out to do, said Madame Rose Moretta. Good gracious, Minister, he isn't trying to rejoin you-know-who, is he? I dare say that he is, his eventual plan, said Fudge evasively, but we hope to catch Black long before that. I must say, you-know-who alone and friendless is one thing, but give him back his most devoted servant, and I shudder to think of how quickly he'll rise again. There was a small chink of glass on the wood. Someone had set down their glass. You know, Cornelius, if you were dining with the headmaster, we'd better head back up to the castle, said Professor McGonagall. One by one, the pairs of feet in front of Harry took the weight of their owners once more. Hems of cloaks swung into sight, and Madame Rose Moretta's glittering heels disappeared behind the bar. The door of the 3 broomsticks opened again. There was another flurry of snow, and the teachers disappeared. Harry? Ron and Hermione's faces appeared under the table. They were both staring at him, lost for words.